So looking at what waste is any effort which occurs in a project that doesn't result in value for the customer. 7 types of waste that we've talked through. I'd urge you to think through your own internal processes, whether it's for software development or just day-to-day running of things. Look at the number of people who might be engaged in doing a single task when it comes to handoffs. The number of times you're tapping someone on the shoulder who's trying to do an in-depth task and saying, can you please change what you're doing and do another task for me? Because that one has a huge impact on that person's output. How does waste apply to projects? Every project has waste. Every one of my projects has waste. And the first step is just accepting that this is the case and starting to just think of it as it's a reality. I want to learn about the waste that is in my project. Examine your system and identify where waste is. Where you find it, do that analysis, determine whether it's worth changing things now, and if not, start a waste log. Just note the places that you've seen waste, and over time you may have an epiphany. You may have that moment where you realise how you can change one thing that will address multiple parts of the system, multiple bits of waste that are occurring in different. And yeah, if the cost-benefit analysis says it's worthwhile changing, then amend the system to account for that waste. So I've got some options in here, looking at a few of the types of waste we've talked about, and just looking at ways that you can address them. So task switching is the first one. This one's a pet peeve of mine, and so I've got a heap of different options when it comes to this one. If the interruptions come from external clients, consider increasing the price to the client of actually interrupting your process. Because everyone always thinks that what they're dealing with at that time is the most important thing in the world. Literally the most important thing. Nothing you had on is nearly as important as this thing. But if you suddenly double the cost to actually address that issue, all of a sudden they're doing a bit more internal accounting and thinking, oh, maybe that can actually wait for tomorrow. If I can wait till tomorrow and the cost goes back to the old cost, then it really makes them examine the criticality of things. Have a support team and a feature team, with one team shielding the other. You actually have a dedicated person. We used to do this with Noble Samurai. We would work on a cycle where we would have 3 devs as part of the feature team, and then we had a dev who was considered the shield for the week. We actually had a little plastic shield that went on their desk, and their job was to work with the support team, like the support team dealing with client inquiries, and actually they were dealing with the day-to-day things and answering the in-depth technical questions, potentially deploying small fixes, but their job was just to make it so that the other guys could sit with their headphones on and get on with the heavy lifting. And work in chunks. If you can break your working day down into chunks of about 3 hours or so, you generally get 2 of those in a working day, and you have the internal discipline not to break from those chunks, what you say is a critical issue may, at its worst, take 3 hours before you're starting to address it. If you find out about it 5 minutes into the chunk and you wait until the end of the chunk to actually start addressing it, only 3 hours have gone by. There are relatively few issues that are that important. But yeah, working in chunks means that people get enough time to properly get into their rhythm, particularly developers. 3 hours is a good amount of time to properly engage with a problem and start productive work on it. And it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you flexibility a few times a day, while still giving them their chance to dive into things. Relearning the process is the next one we're going to look at. Batching your work into features and fixes that are alike. So if you build yourself a backlog of issues, or just some sort of register where you collect all of the ideas and changes you want to make and deliberately impose upon yourself a cycle time. So call it, say, every month you're going to sit down and look at everything that everyone has logged. And this is going to obviously accept the critical emergencies, but you build yourself this backlog, you collect everything together, and then you start to batch things up so people are working on one area of the system once rather than having to continuously revisit it. Document where required and where useful. Some areas of the system just plain don't require documentation, whereas some do. If you find an area of the system that you do have to keep returning to and you have to make multiple fixes to it, that is an area of the system where more documentation is helpful. Let the needs of your system and the needs of, and this works for just general business processes, whenever you have a system that is complex and changing relatively frequently, keep that part documented, but all the day-to-day stuff that people just get, don't worry about it. So pick and choose your times to do documentation. And defects. Increase the rigor of the rules in your system. So if you've got a workflow that has one testing phase currently, the feature gets developed and then is tested by a tester and then it goes live. And if you find you're still getting a high error rate, consider adding a second test in there, a different type of test. So for instance, the issue that is occurring might be one where an external, well, it's not an external tester, a front-end tester isn't going to pick it. Like everything appears to submit correctly on your form, but actually some of your form entries are just being dropped quietly and nothing's ever happening for them. You might want to introduce a code review step, a different type of testing that means that another developer is looking over the work, or potentially, as I know we've got a number of our projects, we've got phases of internal testing and then we've got phases of external testing. So increase the rigor of your system to account for defects. And improve communication between phases and between workers. When you're working with complex features that have to pass between multiple people doing different tasks, the more separated they are and the fewer opportunities they have to communicate between each other, the more error-prone things become. If you only allow people a single chance to talk, then that requires them to have everything covered in that one conversation. They have to have thought through all the edge cases. They have to have literally passed on every bit of information to the next phase. The more opportunity people have to ask questions and to communicate, and the more you have some built-in flexibility in your system where people can talk, the lower the chance of defect, the lower your chances of defect getting it through to a live environment are. They're still going to exist, but you're going to address them before they actually get into a situation where they're particularly, threatening customers.